thank you for that introduction. And I just want to say happy Wednesday. Welcome to day 2 of ScalaCon. As you heard from the introduction, I'm Megan Byrd-Sanicki, and I work at Google in the Open Source Programs Office, where we support our work across hundreds, if not thousands, of open source projects. I'm also the vice chair of the Open Source Initiative, and I started in open source well over a decade ago, starting with the Drupal project, where I helped build and lead the Drupal Association. Before I get started today, I just wanted to start by saying thank you for making time for this session. Having a thriving and productive community is important for all open source projects, and I'm passionate about helping projects create them. So today, we're going to talk about why projects should design their communities, how to apply governance and leadership skills as part of that design, and you're going to walk away with some pro tips that you and your community can start using right away. Sound good? Okay, well, let's get started. First, let's just start off by saying congratulations. Scala is a very successful language, and you have all worked very hard to make this happen. And part of the success is because you have an intentionally designed process for building and releasing your software. And that's really common across all open source projects. This is where you put a lot of your focus, and there are best practices already established for how to do this. But did you know that as you're building your software, you're actually building something else, which is your community? And as you likely know, your community has to function well to support your open development process. You see, how the various groups within your community work together and how you interact with each other as individuals has a direct impact on how well your project functions and how productive it is and how well it can keep to release cycles and things like that. But how much intention did you put into designing your community? Well, for most projects, the community comes together pretty organically, and there really isn't a lot of design to it. And at first, that doesn't matter. It works. But over time, it can have a real impact, a real negative impact. And let me explain what I mean by sharing a story. So a couple of years ago, I was helping a project improve their contributor experience. And we had to interview lots of contributors. And there was one story that really stood out. It was this guy who wanted to contribute, make his first contribution. And he did what a lot of newcomers do. They want to get the lay of the land and understand. They look to the forum queues and kind of try to see how people were interacting there. And he looked to the issue queues to see also how you work there. And he was kind of finding actually that was pretty intimidating for newcomers. Like there wasn't a lot of patience for the newcomers that were coming in, and it just didn't feel very good. And he was a little scared to be embarrassed jumping in. And then he went to Twitter, and it was clear that there had been some sort of community issue, and people were fighting over whose fault it was or who wasn't solving it. And he got a little intimidated and was like, I don't know if I want to be a part of that. That's a little overwhelming. So he had like all these signals that this might be hard. And you just watched on the sidelines for a really long time. And actually, it took him an entire year before he started to really make progress. Fortunately, he persevered. And he said, okay, I'm going to set a goal of just one contribution. And my strategy is to get help. I am going to ask a mentor if they would walk me through the process. And that mentor was more than happy to help. And that contribution happened, which is great. And because the contributor had a learning mindset, this contributor contributed again and again and again. And today, this contributor was one of the top contributors in this project, which is amazing. but it's also pretty unfortunate. I wonder how many contributions were lost because this person had to wait a whole year before they felt comfortable joining the community. And the answer is 400 commits per year. That's what this person's averaging, and that's what this project lost. And I also wonder how many contributions were lost because people like this new contributor just gave up, did not persevere, did not find their path forward, and they bounced. And the answer is too many. Too many find themselves in this situation. Now, this story could be any project. It could be Drupal, it could be .NET, Node.js, Magento, Go, even Scala. And it's important to address these community flare-ups systemically because they're going to keep happening because we're working with people, right? And there's always going to be some sort of conflict that needs to be resolved, but a systemic solution is going to help keep them at bay. And the reason we want to do it is because, the reality is when your community issues go up, your project innovation goes down. There's a direct correlation. And not only do you lose productivity on your project, you lose contributors and contributions. And let's face it, it just feels terrible for everyone invested in the project when there's these community flare-ups. And let's just say the world's been hard enough on us. We don't need to make it harder. The health of the community is directly linked to the success of your project. And intentionally designing your community can help you keep these issues to a minimum because they're going to happen. They don't need to happen as much. And the flare-ups don't need to last as long. So if you intentionally design your community, you can actually resolve issues much faster. So there are several ingredients to focus on when you design your community, but the two I want to focus on today is governance and leadership, specifically building leadership skills in your community. So governance provides the rules of the road for your community, and the leadership skills helps everyone be good drivers on that community highway, especially if someone's slamming on their brakes or starts swerving on the highway. Right? Leadership skills are the ones that help you kind of keep your cool and move forward to reach your goal. So let's look at project governance. So what is governance? As I mentioned, it's the rules of the road for your project. But specifically, governance explains what are all the roles that exist or should exist in your project, and what is their scope? What is not their scope? What authority do they have for decision making? Who has to approve decisions? How do you appeal decisions? And it creates this architecture that unifies your project, just ties all the bits together from forums to documentation and development and events, right? Just creates an architecture to show how they all fit together for the greater good of the project. And when you have that architecture, you can not only just see how people fit together, but you can also see how certain elements might be missing and how you might want to create new groups. So for example, when you have an architecture, then you can apply a code of conduct to the entire project and all the groups within the architecture. And you can create a centralized group that's responsible for enforcing code of conduct, regardless of where an issue might come up within that architecture. So overall, governance helps everyone in the project. It helps you see where everything fits together. It gives general guidelines on how to work together, and it helps members know what is expected of them and what they can expect of others as you're working together. You see, you can think of community in terms of building tree houses. And when a project starts, the creator has a nice, simple tree house that they've built. They invite you in to come and play in that tree house and keep building software together. And the creator might even dream of the community growing and thriving in all kinds of ways. And that simple tree house starts to become this beautiful, well-functioning, all-encompassing tree house. It encloses the whole community. And in this dream, everyone works in an orderly fashion. But the reality is, various groups start to spring up all over the place to meet different needs. They come together organically, and you end up with a kind of a funky tree house. It's a kind of a bunch of different tree houses that are loosely connected. You might have your forum tree house over here, and your document tree house over there, your development tree house over there, and you can kind of get to the different parts of the tree house, but they're kind of functioning independently. And that, as I mentioned, generally works for a while until there's a threat to the project. And maybe it's an internal threat where someone's acting in a slightly different kind of way, swinging off of the treehouse. And maybe that's not so helpful, and maybe that's even hurtful, and it's a threat to the project and something getting accomplished. Or maybe it's an external threat, like your project is losing contributors or end users to another project. And when a project encounters a threat, it can be scary and frustrating. And a lot of times people just want it solved and solved quickly, and they want someone to lead that effort. But when there isn't governance, you start to see a lot of finger pointing. Oh, it's your job to fix this. Oh, no, it's your job to fix this. And people just start asking, well, whose job is it to fix this? We need this fixed right now. This hurts. This isn't fun anymore in the Playhouse. And unfortunately, these debates move to Twitter pretty fast. And then that potential newcomer, that contributor, this is what they're seeing. And it is just really unhelpful and unproductive. And when you start seeing these kinds of issues, it is a strong signal that it is time to work on your governance, either creating a new one or evolving the one that you have to match your current community needs. And of course, many projects have established governance for this exact reason. And there's all kinds of different models that you can take advantage of. So Drupal, which is the project I worked on first, it's a 20-year-old open source content management system. And they actually put their governance in place pretty early on. And that's because Drupal became really popular in 2010, about 2010, and it was just really growing, and the community was growing with it. And, we had our core development, but we also had other people that were really passionate about documentation, another group passionate about security, another group passionate about forums, and they were all functioning really well, but very separated. And so, we definitely had a funky treehouse, and that's great. It's beautiful. It's a little messy, but that's what open source is. It's what makes it great. But we had a board meeting, and one of our advisors who has been in the industry for much longer and kind of has seen it all, told us, you have a risk in your project. You don't have governance, and you have grown, and your funky treehouse is going to encounter a problem, and you don't know how to come together to solve it. And so we took that to heart. The founder of the project took it to heart and started to create governance, which you can find on drupal.org/governance. And really the process that was used is very, lightweight, was identifying all the different groups in the treehouse and getting those leaders together and starting to work with them to see, how do we fit together? What does that architecture look like? As you can see from the image on the screen, some of the groups kind of reported up into the project founder. Some of the functions report into the Drupal Association. And, you can have this governance structure match whatever makes sense for you and your project. Then there was a small group that came together. It was appointed by the founder to propose what the governance should look like. And then it was brought out to the community for feedback so that we could get everyone's perspective. And so there was a listening period. And then the proposal was refined from there. And then it was brought to the leader for final sign off. And then it was published. And we have been working from this governance, and it has been used time and time again to help us navigate all the myriad of issues that can come up in a 20-year-old project. But let me emphasize what governance does not do. Governance is not going to tell each of the different parts of the treehouse how to do their work. You know, the docs team, they're passionate about documentation for Drupal, and they know what needs to be prioritized, and they know the best way to work to get good docs written and out to the project. Governance is not going to take away their agency. Same with security. Could you imagine governance coming in and changing how security works? There are some serious best practices for keeping a project secure, and that goes with forums and all different kinds of groups. Governance does not take away agency. It does not tell you how you should function, which is great because then you still have the collective funkiness within your treehouse, which is what makes open source projects so special and unique. And it's really great that Drupal adopted governance pretty early on because that advisor was right. Something was coming. Something's always coming. That's going to be a threat to a project, and they need to be organized in a way to respond thoughtfully and quickly. And for us, that was Heartbleed in 2014. So for those of you that don't know, Heartbleed is a security bug that was found in OpenSSL, and it affects like the whole internet. So it definitely had a big impact on Drupal and the over 1 million websites out there using Drupal. We had to patch this pretty quickly, but also at the center of it all is we had to address Drupal.org, which is our community platform. This is where the project resides and where the development happens. All of our community groups are there. So we had tens of thousands of users of Drupal that were relying on this site. And it's a complex site, and governance had been done around, well, really everything, but we had governance specifically for the site. You know, there's the security group that oversees security for the project, including Drupal.org. There is an infrastructure group that had oversight into the infrastructure of Drupal.org. Drupal Association has a certain role in maintaining and managing and hosting Drupal.org. And if we had not done our governance work before this threat, we would have spent time saying, well, who owns what? Right? Part of our governance work was a big unteasing of Drupal.org and understanding who had responsibility and authority and decision-making for various aspects of building and maintaining this site that's so core. And fortunately, because we had all of this already figured out, these groups knew how they fit together. They knew who was responsible for what, and they could go right into solution mode. And fortunately, we got on the other side of this issue pretty quickly. And we even were able to coordinate with the Drupal Association for all the communications. So we had broad communications of how to address this for your own website. So this is just a really great example of how governance can help you respond to an internal or external threat. Obviously it's an extreme example of governance working well, but let's face it, any threat can make it hard for a community that's made up of lots of different groups like Scala is. And really, it is just so key to start doing this work sooner than later. So I hope that all projects take on governance so they too can be agile in the face of a threat or challenge. It doesn't always have to be a big threat. So I do offer these pro tips for any project who wants to create governance or evolve their own. The first step is bring your different groups together, bring the leaders of the different groups together. They may not even see themselves as leaders in the project, but those that tend to have the most, activity, setting direction for their part of their treehouse. Bring them all together and let them be part of this solution. And they all have different perspectives of how everything should fit together or what's missing that needs to be created. And I highly recommend when a project does this, that they raise the funds for a facilitator with an expertise in project governance. And there's plenty out there. And the reason is that you all want to be available to have the conversations. And it's unfair to put anyone in the middle who's needs to be part of this solution. So bring in someone who can be neutral, provide guidance and expertise in this process. It will move much faster, much easier. And then come up with a small group who can then flesh out all the ideas, come up with a proposal, and manage the feedback process. And then, when you're done, you're going to be able to put this out to the community, and you'll be able to then help everyone understand what happens when decisions need to be made, what happens when there's a violation of your code of conduct, and how is that enforced, and who has the authority to enforce it. You'll even be able to know how decisions get appealed if that's needed. So these are just some of the key steps I would recommend for getting started with governance. It will save you time and time again and let you focus faster on solutions. So that's governance, a key ingredient for establishing the rules of the road. So now let's talk about the other ingredient, which is how to drive well together on that community superhighway. And that is by building leadership skills in your community. So first, who are the leaders in the community? Some people think, oh, it's the founder, or it's somebody who's been anointed a certain baton of leadership. But the reality is that everyone in your project is a leader. So let's look at that story I told, the contributor story that I told earlier. And who were the leaders in the project? Well, there was the forum moderator. There was the issue queue reviewer that the newcomer was watching how they were behaving. There was the mentor who helped out. And there was even the newcomer. And this newcomer is a leader because they had to demonstrate self-leadership. They had to set a vision for themselves. They had to figure out a strategy to go and make that first contribution. And that makes them a leader as well. And since open source is mostly made up of individuals working together, I'm going to focus a lot on self-leadership today. So first, let's just start with first principles. What is leadership? Well, the reality is there is no one definition. My favorite happens to come from Kevin Cruz, who's a leadership expert. His is leadership is a process of social influence, which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. And I love to emphasize a shared goal, shared by everyone who's decided to get on board to achieve it. And what do leaders do? Well, kind of like what I described with the newcomer, they shape a vision, they come up with a strategy to achieve that vision, they recruit others to help achieve that goal, and they focus on measurable, tangible results. They also foster innovation in learning, and they're able to lead themselves, manage their emotions as they're going through this journey with others. And that's exactly what that newcomer did. The vision was, I'm going to make a contribution. And my strategy, after spending over a year kind of freaked out by what he was seeing, was to ask for help. He recruited a mentor to help him with this, and he had a goal, a very measurable result he wanted to achieve. It was one contribution. That was a success in his mind. And he fostered a learning mindset, and that allowed him to do this contribution again and again and again. And throughout this whole journey, he managed his emotions. It might have been hard that first year when he was looking at things and saying, I'm really intimidated, I'm not sure how to get started. But he found his footing, he managed his emotions to shift it from fear into action, and he was able to achieve his goal. And that's what leaders do. And sometimes it's easier to define what something is by defining what it is not. So leadership, it is not a title and it's not a role. It's really a behavior. It's how you conduct yourself. And so that's why all of you are in a leader role. And it's also not a specific personality type. You know, some people think a leader is someone who's really gregarious and outgoing and extroverted, but that's not true. Introverts make great leaders. And so there's just really no tie to a personality trait. Also, leadership is not management. You know, it's not about did you follow a procurement process and did you deliver everything on budget, right? That is what management is. And it is not about power. You know, as Kevin Cruz says, it's about influencing others. It is not, you know, because you have a title and you have some authority and you can make people do things. Like, yes, that might be true. You might be able to make people do things, but they eventually will not follow you if they don't believe you or feel really invested in where you're trying to take everything. So, you know, leadership is not about power. And leaders use very specific skill sets to achieve that vision and do what leaders do. And here's a list from Harvard Business Review of different skills that leaders commonly use: inspire others, communicate, collaborate, change, connect with others, be strategic, right? Like, these are core skills. So as you'll see, like, being a leader really doesn't have anything to do with your technical skills. Those are very important skills to have, and open source would be nowhere without technical skills. But to really move forward, whether you're leading yourself, leading others, you need to really build up these core skills. And as I mentioned, there are 3 types of leaders. You can lead an organization, like be a project lead, or you could be a CEO, or you could lead others. And maybe that's the forum moderator who's helping other moderators do the work. Or it could be a manager at your company, product manager. And the 3rd type is leading yourself. And as I mentioned, that with the newcomer, this is about managing yourself to get to a desired outcome when working with others. And the reality is you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. Because the more responsibility you take on, the more pressure you have. And you really need to be able to hold yourself steady in the face of all those different pressures and challenges in order to give people clear direction and a sense of confidence that you know where we're going and it's going to be okay. So as I mentioned, we're going to really focus on self-leadership because it's so core in open source, because we're all individual contributors. And the better we get at this, the better we'll be as other kinds of leaders in the project. And one of the key skills needed to be good at leading yourself is having the ability to respond to a situation rather than react. So as you know, things happen to us all day that can be really frustrating, and it can build up. You can finally get to a boiling point. And sometimes it's surprising what that thing is. Maybe it's just that annoying email that you just read, Now, people who are good at self-leadership, they can manage that emotion and find a productive way to respond so that you get to a productive outcome, rather than just sending back a snarky email that just kind of makes matters worse, even if it felt really good in the moment. And I know I have definitely done this. But this, respond versus react, it's a choice, and you get like a split second to make it. And Tara Brach describes the situation best when she said that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is the opportunity to choose response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I'll even say it's in that space we have the opportunity to move our project forward into a better place through a better communication, better collaboration, more intention. But that space, like I said, it's a split second. It is super hard to create that space, manage our emotions, and change the way we behave or want to behave. So, it's really comes down to how good are we at managing our emotions in that split second. And unfortunately, it's really hard. As a species, we're really bad at managing our emotions, especially in that split second. So Dan Goleman, who is the father of emotional intelligence, did research and found that only 36% of people are able to accurately identify their emotions as they happen. So, that sense of being self-aware and being able to self-regulate, it's not something that we're really designed to do well. So, that's why we have these tweets that go out and the emails that are snarky. And I have done it myself. It is sometimes just gratifying, and it's just where you go because, like Dan Goleman says, we're just bad at managing our emotions. But the good news is there is a solution. It's a little surprising, but neuroscience found that emotional intelligence can be improved with mindfulness. And mindfulness is the act of settling the mind and being aware of the present moment. And you can achieve this through meditation or journaling or even drinking a cup of tea, because you have to slow down and sip and be mindful of it so you don't burn your lip. And what that does is it helps just slow the brain down so it can kind of create that space, be a little bit more mindful of what's happening in the moment, which is what you ultimately need when you get that email. You need to be able to just calm everything down and know that you can get there quickly. Now, I'm going to be honest. When I heard this as the solution, I said, this is not for me. No, I'm not doing meditation. I don't think meditation in the morning is going to affect me in the afternoon when I get that email that's going to piss me off. But I did give it a try, and I did start a 10-minute meditation practice. And I did find that when those situations started to arise later in the day, I had more reserve and I could slow down a little bit more. I found that I was able to create that space to choose a response versus react. This research, not only did it help me, but Google's been finding it to be very helpful as well. They actually put meditation rooms in all of our offices, which I hope we can go into soon. And they created a program called Search Inside Yourself, which applies this kind of neuroscience and the concept of meditation and mindfulness to work. And it's a program for leaders that you can check out. It's open to the public. So, in open source, we really need to be able to use a strategy like mindfulness to manage ourselves, because the very act of working online puts us at a disadvantage. Our brains have a much harder time having positive interactions when we're working online. And that might be if we're on GitHub or on Slack or Twitter or email. And that's because online collaboration triggers an online disinhibition effect. And what that is, well, our brains just don't work well with online collaboration. So the first thing is, when we don't have eye contact, we really lose empathy for each other. Our brains are wired to read body language in order to pick up cues so that we can kind of quickly self-regulate and be more in sync with that person. But with online communication, of course, we don't get this eye contact. And without it, our brain loses its capacity for empathy. And unfortunately, even though we try to use emojis to bridge that gap, it does not help. We think it's helping, it's actually not helping. And research shows our empathy just goes down quite a bit with online communication. Also, we have this challenge called projection of voice. And research shows that we assign a tone to the voice of emails and tweets and comments. And the majority of the time, we ascribe a negative tone to whatever we're reading, when the author actually intended either a neutral or positive tone. So what this means is that in our communications, in our interactions within our project, because we use online communications, we are less empathetic and we kind of assume the worst of each other. So that's really putting us at a disadvantage. And this is why it's so important that we start building up the self-leadership skills. Practicing mindfulness obviously is one way that can help. And it's really so that you're more self-aware when we're having these interactions, and you can control yourself and help build up empathy for someone, and maybe not assume a negative tone when that tweet comes across your screen. But let's face it, mindfulness alone is not going to help. I definitely encourage it. But, when these situations come up, it is just so easy to react. And it really helps to have kind of tools ready to be used when these situations come up so that you are prepared to respond, right? You don't have to think so hard. You can be more intentional with your response. So I have a few pro tips that you might want to use as strategies to respond versus react. So let's take a look at a couple of these. So you get that email that makes you angry and you want to respond and not react. And so you need to reset, right? You want to make sure you just don't touch that keyboard right away. And there are some things that you've heard of before, but count to 10, right? Just literally force yourself to create that space. It's going to give your brain enough time to reset, kind of calm down, let the cortisol levels go down so that you can be in a better mindset for responding in a productive way. Also, take deep breaths. That deep breath actually gives more oxygen to your brain. It tells your brain you're okay. And that primitive brain then reduces your cortisol levels. And this is a natural way to reset your nervous system. Sip hot tea. I'm telling you, it works. You just need to have it kind of ready. So maybe use this in the wintertime. And then when it gets really bad and you just know you're just going to take a while to be able to respond productively, take a walk. Especially with all this working from home, we just go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. We're not really getting the breaks we need to reset that we would normally have if we were in an office. So you have to really be intentional about just walking away when you need to. And there are other strategies you can use to respond rather than react. One of them is used by improv, which is the yes and approach. So when somebody says something like, I really think we should move in this direction, instead of saying, no, I don't want to do that, let's do this, it's better to say, yes, that's a great idea. Maybe you can find something that you actually liked in that. And I also think we should consider X, Y, and Z. What that does is it helps to continue the conversation, build the conversation. If you always start with no, you're going to find that people are less willing to collaborate with you. Kind of just shuts everything down, and it's just not as productive. A similar approach comes from the design world using I like, I wish, I wonder. So again, someone might come to you with a proposal or an idea. You can say, I like that idea. I like this specifically, but I wish it also considered this. And I wonder how you could expand that thinking to also solve for this problem over here. Again, you're not shutting down the conversation. You're building it. You're designing a conversation. Another way to prepare yourself for productive responses is by studying nonviolent communication, which could be a talk all in of itself. And I won't have time, but I will certainly encourage you to go watch a video on YouTube. There's books out there on nonviolent communication. It can just really take out the language that creates friction. Makes it hard for people to come to the table and talk with you. The other approach is using active listening skills as you're interacting with someone, and you can use this very much online. And this is letting someone share their thought or idea, and then coming back to them and saying, you know, what I hear you say is, and then you kind of summarize what you heard. And what this does is a couple of things. It shows and signals to the other person that you are listening to understand, not listening to interrupt and then interject your idea, right? But truly letting them know you have a shared understanding. It also gives you a chance to make sure you have a shared understanding before you build on that conversation. So you have that chance to get corrected and ask some more questions. And then you have a foundation. You can continue this idea building together. And then the last strategy is just know when it's time to switch to voice, to get on a video and just look the person in the eye and have the conversation, even if it's hard. But we really just don't need to have things flying back and forth and email and Twitter and Slack channels. No, it's just not helpful for anyone. If you start finding that there's just too much friction in a conversation, it is a signal to come together through voice. And it's your brain telling you, I can't handle, I'm having the disinhibition effect and I need help. It's pretty much what's happening. So these are just some pro tips that I highly encourage you to use. It's a way to intentionally design the kinds of interactions you have within your project. Well, that was a lot of content I just covered. And so I thought it'd be helpful as I end that we just recap kind of the key points that I went over today. And they are that your community health impacts your project. And the stronger your community is, the more intentionally designed your community is, the better and more productive the output of your software will be, the happier your end users will be. Because the more a community has issues, the less project innovation you're going to have. And so intentionally designing your community is the best way to support your project. And you could do it through governance and building leadership skills. On the governance front, you want to create that unified treehouse. You don't want to rebuild it. You don't want to change its quirkiness. You don't want to take away agency and expertise from all the different facets, but you do want to unify it. So people know how to work together, know who's responsible for what and how decisions are made, so that when there's a threat, it's really fast and a lot easier to respond to it, protecting your project, reducing the issues, resolving them faster. And as you're working with each other, you want to build self-leadership skills to start with, or just leadership skills. So that way, when we're working together online and we are faced with all these challenges of lack of empathy and just kind of hearing the worst in our online communications with each other, we know how to manage our emotions to respond versus react. We know how to get the best out of each other so we can influence others to join us to achieve a vision with a measurable goal. And these are the key things I think a project can focus on today to start building a really strong, healthy community. And I hope your project will start thinking about doing this. I know a lot of projects are working on this right now. It's going to make you more productive. It's going to provide more harmony. And again, you'll know what to do when your project runs into a challenge. And you'll know how to really work well together on solutions rather than pointing fingers at each other, trying to figure out who's going to do what and who's responsible. But most of all, you're going to help that future community member. You're going to help that future contributor come out of the shadows and start their journey with you and join your treehouse so that you can build an even stronger future for Scala together. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about intentionally designing your community or any community. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm actually off Twitter. But I just really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you all today. So thank you.
Hey, Megan, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I'm looking right at you. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity. It was great.
Great. Well, we're so happy to have you. Let's jump in. We have a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay, good.
There is a prominent Scala open source project that explicitly gives its founder the ability to override code of conduct related decisions made by its steering committee. Is this good practice?
Okay, let me understand. So the founder has the ability to override code of conduct related decisions made by its steering committee. Well, I mean, I think it really depends. I mean, I've definitely run into, watched Drupal's code of conduct group work, and I would say they are even offering this kind of mentorship because they've been doing this for so long and they've been seeing what works and what doesn't work. So I would definitely say we should talk afterwards. I can connect you to this mentor group that could definitely help answer this, because there's a lot of different ways I could answer this. I would say that it's not great for the founder to have this for any reason. Then that is a lot of responsibility for a founder or any single person to make a decision that could have such a big impact, that I definitely think that group decision making is a little bit better when it comes to code of conduct versus giving it to one single person. I'm sure they can make a very good decision, but that is a lot to put on yourself.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to our next question. On strategies for newcomers to stay and start contributing, what could be the approaches? I can think of more detailed issues or specific guidelines, or maybe it involves more general concepts.
Yeah, I've definitely looked into this, and there's a couple things that really surfaced as ways to help your newcomers. You really want to think about what is their journey and what's friction in the journey. How do you make it easy to take that first step? So when I was doing my interviews, some things that I found were there can be a sense of like there's a party going on and they've invited you to the party, but like you don't know how to do the dance. And you kind of feel like there's like this VIP line for the party and you're definitely not in it. Like this is literally language people were using in the interviews. And what they said would be really nice is having a mentor. having a human to talk to versus trying to do it on your own makes a huge difference. I know Drupal definitely invested a lot in their mentor program. It's all volunteer run, and they provide a lot of resources. They go to camps, they go to the Drupal cons. They have office hours. And so that's one great way. Another is documentation. So really think about the documentation you have for newcomers. Do they understand what the project's all about? Do they understand how this community is managed? How are decisions made? What is their governance? What's expected of them? What can they expect of others, right? Code of conduct, like, is that all out there? But then also, how do you contribute? And what are some first time, good, easy contributions that can be made? A mentor might provide this, or you could maybe even find some of them tagged. For me, for my first contribution, I fixed some grammar. Like, it was not code. I am not a developer. So they found something that was very simple for me to do. So I understood the concepts. It wasn't so much about the actual improvement that I made. And then also within the documentation, you might even tag or recommend that they start making improvements to the documentation itself, because that might be an easier place to start than actually in the code.
Those are some really great points, and I hope that that answered this question. I no doubt it did, but I hope that this gives some idea on how to move forward. Our next question: are there any further books, trainings, resources, etc., that you would recommend for leadership skills, collaboration, and governance?
Absolutely. Starting with leadership skills, this is something I love going down the leadership rabbit hole, looking at both best practices, neuroscience. So you can get leadership skills in lots of different ways. I mean, if you know, in the US, there's an organization called 4-H, and it's about, I don't know what it's about. It's about agriculture and getting kids out there on farms. But what I do know is that the high school kids have to be the ones that lead the organization and the chapter, and then they have to teach and lead all of the younger kids. So like, you can find leadership training in the most unique places. But if you're looking for traditional leadership, of course, universities have them. Currently, I'm going to Stanford's LEAD program. There are all these kinds of executive education programs out there, so it's not just Stanford. You can learn about leadership and neuroscience in places like UPenn's positive psychology department. And then, of course, there's leadership experts you can learn from. So you can find them all writing on Harvard Business Review. There's quite a few that I like to read and pull in into my work, but it's really kind of like what resonates the most with you. So I'm forgetting the author's name, but he writes books like 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, or Death by Meeting. And I can't believe I'm forgetting this name, but there's just lots of books. And then in terms of like collaboration, this kind of goes into leadership skills as well. But governance specifically, the nonprofit space, go to boardsource.org, has a lot on governance. If you want something specific to governance, there's a lot of resources. Even like GitHub has recommendations for governance guidelines and approaches right there for all the projects to look at and consider. So those are just a few resources that I would recommend.
Great. I think the author you were thinking of is Patrick Lencioni.
Yes, thank you.
The power of Google. What can I say?
Yeah.
All right. Our final question for you today is: how do you find and then approach a mentor for an open source project you want to contribute to? It's difficult to figure out whom and how to ask for this big favor.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the community, if they're really like keen to think about that new contributor experience, They need to make it easy to find a mentor, right? So I know what we've done in the past was that on our user profiles, you could tag yourself as someone who is willing to be a mentor. And then, of course, I talked about the mentor program. So, I mean, I think first and foremost, if your project is like wants new contributors and you're serious about it, you need to take these steps. It's really on you more than it is on the new contributor. And of course, if you are a new contributor and you're asking like, okay, it's not there, what am I going to do? Well, I would definitely kind of look around to see who is engaged, whether it's in forums, right? Who's having these positive interactions, helping community members, and you'll start to see these names kind of bubble up and reach out to them and just ask them directly. And maybe you don't want to, you're not comfortable saying, will you be my mentor? But you might say like, I'm looking for help. Do you know of anyone who can help me? And, people do like to help others, and I'm sure you'll find some good resources.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being here today. I hope you get to enjoy the rest of the week and maybe catch a few more sessions as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great conference.
Thanks.